Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, together with chesslecture.com, and I would like to show you a miniature in the Budapest Gambit. And the Gambit is after d4, knight f6, c4, e5. Typically, it's not seen as, as a very common Gambit these days. One way you typically see the move e6 and trying to go for the Nimzo or for the Queen's Indian. If knight c3 it's the Nimzo, if the knight f3, you can get the Queen's Indian. But from time to time, after c4, you may see the move e5. And if you're not prepared for this move, you may actually get in trouble as white. But if you are prepared, I think you can score pretty well, to which I will make a point. I will show you one of my own games where I basically decided to take a theoretical line. So I took on e5, my opponent plays knight g4, and theory says the main move is bishop f4, simply protecting the pawn. And now my opponent plays very aggressive chess, g5. g5 is actually not the main line. Typically, one may see moves such as bishop b4 check, or maybe knight c6 first, followed by knight f3, bishop b4 check, knight d2, for instance, queen e7, and after a3, knight takes, knight takes. By the way, taking the bishop, of course, runs into a well-known trap, knight d3 checkmate. So knight takes, again taking the bishop is checkmate, so e3, and typically white gets very good play. Bishop takes, queen takes, simply two bishops and good position. So that's why my opponent went for the very aggressive line, for the move g5. But the key to understanding this opening, and I'm doing it from the white's perspective, so I'm trying to show you how maybe not to refute the Budapest Gambit, but at least get a decent game, is to understand that g5 is really weakening of the kingside pawns. In chess, there is the age-old principle that applies time and time again, and it's very simple. The pawn cannot go backwards. Of course, everybody knows this rule, but if you really think deep about it, you will understand that it actually implies some very, very important lessons. Well, number one, white is really going to have easy time exploiting black's king if black gets to castle kingside. So another point here is that weakening of the squares, f6 square is weak. So you see there is all these little nuances with the pawn g5. So for now I simply play bishop g3, and you're going to see shortly how I really take advantage of this weakening move. So bishop g7, clearly black wants to recapture the pawn and have a very nice diagonal for his bishop. Well, for now, knight f3, knight c6, and one may typically see the move knight c3 played here right away. I play it, and the key idea is that you can't really defend the pawn on e5, so you give it up, so black takes. And the key idea here is, now that the material is balanced, black thinks that, oh, black should be fine, but the key, once again, I'm going to stress, is this pawn being on g5. If you take in your mind to put the pawn on g6, then yeah, black is totally fine, no problems, no weaknesses, and black can develop. But this pawn being on g5 changes the evaluation of the position 360 degrees, or maybe I should say 180 degrees here. So h4 exclamation. It's not common that you see move h4 played with the king completely stuck in the center with the light square bishop not even developed, and with the e2 pawn and g2 pawn still being present. But yet it is this move that I think will give black the most problems. So my opponent decides to take on f3, but just to illustrate my point, if he plays g4, I can take and play h5, preparing bishop h4 in the right moment, and really black is going to face some very difficult times. If knight takes, knight d5, hitting the pawn, bishop h4 is next, I think black is really going to have some difficult time defending this position. So I think white is almost winning there, actually. So my opponent decides to take on f3, and here again I take with the g pawn. Notice that e takes d would be maybe perhaps normal for some players, opening up the bishop, you know, getting ready to castle, but once again, I'm not in the business of castling short here. I want to castle long. So that's why I take with the g pawn, with the option of controlling more space and activating my bishop via h3 square. So here my opponent decides to play the move d6, which I think may be a little bit perhaps too aggressive. Normal move would be h6, after which I have very simple plan, queen c2, castle, and continue my attack. Notice that I have very nice square for my knight on d5, and I'm always threatening to take twice and to exchange rooks, and maybe queen from c2 can start harassing the bishop on queen h7. So in general, this position, I think white has a small edge, but nevertheless, black should have tried to play it in the game. So d6 simply takes on g5, and now with the super aggressive strategy, black simply ignores and plays bishop e6. So this is a pawn sacrifice. If queen takes g5, I think my opponent was afraid of knight d5. And this is a serious concern. Knight takes check. If king d8 or king f8, I can throw in queen takes d6 check, and the rook is hanging as well. So he doesn't really want to go backwards. So that's why he started the aggressive opening with the move g5 earlier. He continues his plan, just developing all his pieces. My king is stuck in the center. So knight d5, occupying the key outpost. The pawn on b2 is not really such a big deal. Knight d4. By the way, if bishop takes b2, what can I play here? Well, here I can simply play the move rook b1. And if bishop, let's say, back to g7, I have some nice possibilities. I can pick up the pawn on b7. Now c7 is hanging. And even though my king is sort of under attack, you know, I have to be worried about a move like this. Especially if I take with the pawn, I'm going to lose right away. But thankfully I can take with the queen, and this check. So what? My king is on d1, not a big deal, whereas black's position is actually in big trouble. So let's go back. So knight d4, again, aggressive move, but I simply play e3, knight f5, and bishop f4. I want to preserve my dark square bishop and also defend the pawn on g5. c6, hitting my knight, simply knight c3 back, queen a5, again, very aggressive strategy here for black, and I'm not really afraid of this. I simply play queen d2 and getting ready to castle long. So castles, castles. By the way, bishop takes c3, I think this endgame should favor white. Not only am I up a pawn, but this guy is super weak. My bishop can get developed to d3. I can double up on the h-file. This pawn is attacked only once. I don't really see a way for him to win it. So white definitely stands better. Alright, so castles. And the opening part is over. White is up a pawn. Black doesn't really have that much compensation here. Yes, you do have a very nice, dark square bishop, but in reality, that's the only good piece that black has. So king b8, king b1. I can't really exploit this yet, so I simply improve my king. King a1. Now, I should also mention that here black, besides king b8, had the attractive possibility to go for the pawn on a2. So, of course, black gets the pawn back. But in reality, though, I'm not so sure about this position, because first of all, I can play e4. Queen a1 check is nothing special. I can always move my king up, and then I can win the pawn on d6. So I don't think black really has any serious threats here. So let's go back to the game. So both sides are improving their kings. King a8, he got away from danger, and I simply play bishop d3. My plan is actually quite obvious. I'm going to play maybe knight e4, maybe trade queens. And again, the key here is any endgame, white is going to have superior pawn structure. And don't forget, I'm still up pawn. So my opponent made this game a miniature with the next move. And let me pause, or ask you to pause the videos and see if you can figure out a way how to finish the game on the spot, immediately make black resign. And for those of you who found white's next move, knight a4, you basically solved the problem. It turns out that, believe it or not, the queen is trapped. Black actually trapped their own queen by going queen c5. It's a horrible move, of course, but knight a4 could be easily overlooked. And it turns out that all the key retreat squares are taken. b6, b4, and a5. So pretty much game's over. But let us try to figure out a way without giving up the queen if black can try to make any progress here. Well, I don't really see anything that black can do. So I mentioned already that taking on c3, queen takes, pawn takes, very favorable endgame. The other option that I was thinking maybe my opponent was thinking is to play d5. Maybe that's partially why he played the king away from the center. But even here, after c takes d, it's really hard to find a useful move. If pawn takes d5, knight b5 is really powerful. And guess what? With that c7 square, I think black will not survive that long. So d5 really weakens that square. The knight from f5 doesn't really have any moves. The rook on h8 is stuck guarding the h7 pawn. So here I can conclude that black strategy backfired, and there is simply no compensation, and white is better. So I want to again review the key part of this game, how white managed to get a very big advantage. And it all started in the opening. So with the move g5, remember, pawns don't go backwards, and after simply completing the development, I give up the e5 pawn back, and the key is undermining the g5 with h4 will give white a stable edge. Now, any pawn structure is probably going to be in white's favor, and even though materially we're equal, black will suffer for the rest of the game. So knight takes, again, key here is that g takes f, and after d6 I take on g5, and really the pawn structure looks kind of funny. I sort of play on the opening the g and the h files without working my way in the center, but it really is very difficult for black to play. I have very important outpost, and my opponent decided to sack that pawn, and after knight d5, knight d4, I think already black is facing some serious issues. So I hope you enjoyed this miniature, and know how to handle the Budapest Gambit as white in the future. This was Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, together at chesslecture.com.